My name is Ken. My question is, if a territory becomes a country that is not recognized by every state, does the country get a seat in the General Assembly of the United Nations? Some examples might include Kosovo, Greenland, Western Sahara, or what is the process to get a new country into the United Nations General Assembly?
Well, thank you. Yeah,
Can I ask you a supplementary to the first question? The question was, are you at the United Nations being equally directed towards developed and developing countries? Now, in drugs, for example, you are constantly talking about Afghanistan and Colombia and Thailand, that they are producing drugs. But I've never heard you talk of countries that are consuming drugs. That is, say, the demand factor, which is the United States and Europe. Nobody talks about them, and I have no idea what action is being taken by you in the United States to cut drug consumption. But you are constantly talking in Drugs and Crime Department about Colombia and other countries. Well, that's not fair. There is an
there is an
unfairness.
I think I don't have an entire a complete answer to that, except to say that there is discussion. The UNODC, the Office of Drugs and Organized Crime, or the Office of Drug Control, and which also deals with trafficking and organized crime, does have regular consultations with the developed country members. Also, it does go into the questions of drug trafficking, and therefore it goes beyond just the question of the growing of opium and the heroin trafficking alone, but it also goes into the fact that it goes into organized crime means that much of the discussion with the developed countries are on modalities of controlling the trafficking. But I think it does also take into, in the course of consultations, there are other aspects which mentioned, including, I don't know if organ trafficking has actually been taken up specifically, but there certainly has been a discussion of drug trafficking in terms of and the use, where it has been taken, the effects, etc. And now these are, in a sense, difficult questions. They are questions of, particularly where they concern developed countries. There are always questions of donor support and things like that, and because much of the financing of these offices are done by donor countries who are among the developing countries, developed countries. So in a sense, there are certain real inhibiting factors, but I think increasingly now it is these organizations of the UN are moving in the direction of more open and more direct discussion of some of these across the board, even in developed countries. Now,
can I ask you a supplementary before you answer the second question?
Yes.
The second question was about the post-colonial aspects of the United Nations, that there are certain territories which are not yet independent. Now, you had an important role in the trusteeship territories. There were 11 of them. But there are a number who are still, either they have not exercised the right of self-determination or their right of self-determination has not been recognized. The Charter puts the right of self-determination very high. It's Article 1 of the Charter. But you have countries which have determined, Taiwan for example, and yet we do not recognize. You have other countries which have exercised, Kosovo, and we do not recognize. Some which have not been allowed to exercise, Western Sahara, because the referendum cannot take place, Malvinas, which still is a colonial territory of Britain. And so it seems that somehow this great thing which you created in the UN, which was decolonization, and which I think is the greatest achievement of the UN, has somehow not been completed, even 60 years down the line.
Yeah, well, I think to an extent this is really a political issue. Whether or not there has, what constitutes self-determination, how do you recognize it, how many people recognize it. Now, obviously, if a country, if there are people who decide that they are going to determine their own future, that expression is going to become a standing feature. It is going to be, I mean, it'll have to be addressed one way or the other in the political discussions, either within states, in regions, or by the United Nations. The question is, to become a member of the United Nations, there is a technical necessity of the entire membership actually agreeing to your being a member. That is a technical necessity. So if, and it also means that the Security Council must also agree. If this obviously falls against the limitation of there needing to be a unanimity in the Security Council, that is, a veto can actually be exercised by any permanent member. Therefore, even if Taiwan were to decide to apply to become a member, it's not likely to get in, because the Chinese are not going to allow that. That is again a reality. But even if the Chinese were to have, they would still have to have a a 2/3 majority of the membership in order to become a full member of the United Nations. And that's one. Secondly, for countries that are, in a sense, territories who have not yet, Kosovo is again an instance where the moment the number of recognitions were to pass a particular sort of limit or a level, it could automatically become part of the membership if the 2/3 mark has been crossed. Now, because wouldn't seem to be the kind of permanent member opposition to that kind of a membership. Other territories, there may be some. I don't know about Greenland, because Greenland is, I think,
they're organizing a referendum very soon.
Yes, that's right. But at the present moment, it's still under Denmark, as far as I know. So it is a question of how that process were to work itself out. And there is a regular practice, which of course the Decolonization Committee has actually practiced over the years, and the entire process of decolonization, the entry of states into the United Nations, has been actually the result of the exercise by people of their right to self-determination.
Under Secretary General, before I ask Fairleigh Dickinson to close this session, we are, as you know, working with the university, Fairleigh Dickinson, which has been very close to the UN,
yes,
and which has done remarkable work in setting up these video conferences, etc. But we have a large number of students in front of us, and I'd like to ask you, what are a few words of advice that you would like to give to young students who have much greater belief in the United Nations and in its work than skeptics like me? What advice can you give them?
Well, let me, I don't know whether I can actually give you advice, but let me tell you of my own experience. I've been a diplomat in the Indian Foreign Service for 38 years plus. And it's after I retired, of course I worked in the United Nations representing India on two occasions, in the 70s, late 70s, and then in 2002. But it is after coming to the United Nations as a member of the international civil service that I have been able to view it from a somewhat different perspective. What I see in the United Nations, particularly among the human resources that one encounters every day, the people working for the United Nations, is the tremendous fund of idealism that they have, the ability, the willingness to work extraordinary levels of performance, and the kind of faith that we see in the field of the populations around the world in the role of the United Nations. The institutional prestige of the United Nations around the world is so great that you cannot but be impacted by this idealism. To a certain extent, in many parts of the world, particularly in the developing parts of the world, the UN represents the ultimate hope, not just in terms of solution of their political problems, but the hope for a better world in terms of the Millennium Development Goals. And I think the UN represents the kind of way in which they can access some of the fundamental requirements for a decent, dignified life. I see that all the time, and perhaps my most, let's say, my proudest moments, as it were, in the United Nations in this capacity was when actually I went, interestingly enough,